Oh dear.
We can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Perfect.
Excellent. Great, thank you. Hello, a very warm welcome to all of you. Those of you who are able to listen to the lilting tunes of Nina Simone, I hope you put you in the right mood for resilience. A conversation, this is our third, colleagues, in our Connected Europe initiative with Vodafone, where we are looking at how digital infrastructure can help Europe become more successful, more green, and more resilient. Today, as I said, is our final cluster of discussions around the topic of resilience. As those of you who've been on this journey will know, our classic ecology for these conversations is that we bring citizens together and ask them questions in relation to the topic. On this occasion, we have spoken about resilience, and then we bring it to a group of experts, commentators, thinkers, policy wallahs to actually dive into the topic and come up with a set of recommendations. And then we bring it to you, a wider audience from across Europe and the wider world, to be able to dress down those recommendations. Have we got them right? Are they the right ones? What's missing? What should we be thinking about alternatively, and how do we make them happen? So this conversation, as I said, is the final in this series that we've had. Which we hope now what will happen is after we've had this conversation, we will then move into a survey, which I'll speak about towards the end of this session. And then we hope to have a report ready on the 14th of October with all the recommendations relating to our work on Connected Europe. Before I say anything further, just for the rules of the game of engagement, on Zoom, please have your video on, your name, and be muted. And if you wish to raise a question, please use your virtual hand. If those of you don't know where it is, go to the participants icon and press that and you'll find your little hand there. Otherwise, please do stay muted. I'd also encourage all of you to use a Zoom chat. Those of you who've been here before do know that it's actually quite lively and active. It's a space where you can share ideas, thoughts, respond to people, place resources, place queries, etc., and have a conversation about the topic. I also want to warmly welcome our people watching on live stream. You are not left out. If you wish to raise a question or a query, again in the same fashion, use hashtag FOE debate and we'll take your question. And we'll try to take a question in the time that we have. We have a range of colleagues from everywhere around Europe and beyond, as I said, to discuss this topic of a resilient Europe. It's not a new topic. It's been in the policy parlance for over 30, 40 years, gradually increasing in pace in terms of its value, an increasing sense of what it actually means to policymakers and people more generally, and citizens. What does it actually mean when we think about the concept of resilience? What we've identified here for this conversation is about coping, adapting, and bouncing back from future shocks. We've just been through one of the most seismic shocks in our history that's affected every aspect of our lives and has actually fundamentally shaken up what it is to be living in a society, and to a certain extent has made us think dramatically about the rules we've been operating by and whether they're sufficient. And what the shock has identified very significantly is that a lot of our systems are not ready, they're not fit, and they're not future-proof, they're not shock absorbent. How do we make sure that as we look ahead, where climate and digital are likely to give us many, many more shocks, and with great rapidity actually, that we ensure that our starting point, which are people, citizens, are able to withstand those shocks, live lives stably, fruitfully, and with a sense of purpose and well-being. So this is the conversation we'd like to have with you. We've circulated paperwork in advance. I hope you've had a chance to reflect on it. And you have a view. If not, listen to colleagues in the room and engage. This is not, as you probably are aware, and if you're not, we don't have speakers and presentations. This is about using all of your brains in Zoom and elsewhere to engage in this topic, for helping us move the dial on some of the conversation about resilience. How do we stop it from becoming a hackneyed term that means nothing but used everywhere, but actually has relevance, and we are clear about what we mean in terms of systems, processes, and people in terms of resilience. So, without a further ado, I'd like to invite Ben, as ever, from Vodafone. Ben, say a little bit about why this topic is important and your perspective on it, please. And a warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Dharmendra, and good afternoon to everyone. Why is this topic important? Well,
you're going to have to just either Ben. Sorry, you're not very loud, so you may have to either turn your volume up or come closer.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure my volume will affect how people hear me, but I guess it's my microphone, and I don't know how to do that.
Okay, no, it's better.
Is it better? Okay.
It's better.
So, in terms of the importance of resilience, I think it's only necessary to look at the agenda that you've put together, Dharmendra, which I must admire you for your optimism, because you're trying to cover an enormous amount in an hour and a half. And yeah, well, good luck. I know you keep things speeding along nicely. But for me, resilience really means, in respect of digital, it means digital across the board. And I think this is where we've had the policy debates previously on the green, on the successful Europe, and they were not narrow, but they were specific and focused. But whereas I think when we come to this resilience theme, it is very broad, and it means a lot. And in digital, it is, as I said, digital across the board, which means you can't focus on one part of digital and assume that if you get that right, you've become resilient. It really means all the different aspects of digital must be in place. One of the things, I think the threads that have come through some of the debates we've had is really, is digital a common good? I think that's on the table today. Or the infrastructure, is it a public good? It is a human right, has been referred to a few times. I don't think any of these terms are right from a purist economics point of view, but I think what they do express is a sentiment that I think we can all agree with, which is citizens just expect it to be there and for it to work and for it to be available. And we have to, as a policy community, as a business community, ensure that is fulfilled. And they just don't. People are no longer accepting that there'll be areas where it's not coverage or not quality, and that's really important to make that happen in the months and years ahead. And then looking more broadly at digital, not just the infrastructure, but the use of digital. What I've found fascinating from the debates is the theme of trust coming through. And us at Vodafone, sometimes we have a blinkered approach, and we just assume that we'll bring everyone on the digitalization journey with us. We know digitalization is accelerating. This is not a trend that's going to be reversed. It is happening everywhere. But we also know that in that, trust becomes key, and we have to make sure that citizens trust in the digital services. And for me, I'll just say this two really things that are important things I think this needs to address. So number one is, we see a direct correlation between trust and digital skills, right? So the more, I think that came out also in the debate, the more people are skilled on digital, the more they can trust, because they know what they're dealing with. The point about the highways and the 7-lane highway, if people don't know how to drive, really resonated. I actually used that line on a panel debate with Bruegel, and that was picked up. So thank you very much. Whichever citizen made that point, I'm truly appreciative of it. It was picked up in your active, so I got some good coverage as a result. But it really is important. Digital skills means trusting in the digital acceleration we see all around us. But also means, I think, citizens need to trust that their expectations of digital across the piece, in terms of how governments digitalize, how business digitalize, how they themselves are able to use digital services, can all be delivered as best as possible simultaneously, in line with the delivery of the infrastructure. And so the last thing I'll say is that trust, how do they trust that it's going to happen? Well, some will point to the Recovery and Resilience Facility that Europe is now starting to approve and hopefully distribute money in the months ahead. This is a really good start, obviously, and it will help across the piece, both all infrastructure, public services, businesses, and skills. There is investment in all of these areas. But research that we've commissioned and was published yesterday, so I'll point to it, from Deloitte, looked at what the funds will produce or provide compared to what the gap is and where we want to get to. And they push us a certain way along, but they don't get us anywhere near to the end point. So it is clear that in addition to the public money, there needs to be a real concerted effort on the policy side to ensure that, and on businesses as well, to ensure that we are able to introduce this step change in digital performance that citizens want to be able to trust us that we can deliver. So for me, it's the resilience which is underpinning, digital underpins it for our economies, for our society. We know we need to be more digital to be more resilient. We've learned that in the last 18 months. We know we're moving in the right direction with some of the plans we have in place, and we know that there's more work to be done. And so I'm really looking forward to the debate this afternoon, where we can tie in certain aspects of the digital journey into resilience and see what policy proposals can be made in that regard. So looking forward to the debate, and as usual, I'll try to make some comments and chat as we go along.
Ben, thank you very much. Ben, thank you. And also for, we haven't posted, but you may want to post the Deloitte stuff that you just referred to that people might find very helpful. That's a kind of a very useful framing contribution in terms of the central, I suppose, pivot of resilience is going to be trust. We know it's a consistent theme in so many areas, but in particular when we think about resilience, there's something about the emotion, the feeling, the perception of trust that drives a lot of behavior, and it seeds confidence in one aspect or another. What we would like to do is structure this conversation around three large topics. As Ben said, it's rather ambitious, but hey, we've got bright people in the virtual room elsewhere to help us along this journey. So the first topic is very much about the public-private partnerships, but wrapped around the notion of common good. So a common good approach to public-private partnerships. What does that mean, and how does that impact resilience? What we know is that public-private partnerships were absolutely tested during this health and economic crisis, especially during the health drama. And we know that what was lacking was the absence of trust in those relationships, but even the absence of some of the most important partnerships that should have been there in place, and they were made up along the way. So what do we learn from that in terms of resilience and moving forward? The second and critical one, which is about, in a sense, people's feeling of resilience, but also their sense of confidence around their skills. And what is it about their learning? And on this case, I think we're moving to a lifelong learning model for education. But what is it about skills and education for more balanced lives? And how does that notion help people feeling stronger, better, being able to cope more and bounce back? And finally, that theme of trust, and very specifically, the notion of engagement. There's so much discussion about citizen engagement, and it feels like there's a time coming where we need to sort of bite the bullet and sort the chaff from the wheat and be really clear about the purpose of citizen engagement, especially in the context of resilience. So, without further ado, I'm going to kick off with a conversation that we need to have around public-private partnerships. And as I said, please don't hesitate to engage on the chat, on the virtual hand. But I want us to start by inviting Joost Kuhlmann. You're within the Commission. You've read the documentation that we've circulated in advance. A warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. Give us your take on public-private partnerships for a common good.
Well, I'm not sure I have something specific to say about this. I've not participated in previous discussions. The way I approach this conversation is now that where I'm working in the Director General for Economic and Financial Affairs, we are looking at all the recovery and resilience plans of the member states. And in view of the topic today, I've looked a bit at where the action is in terms of the digital sphere in these programs. So I can tell you a little bit about that.
Please, that will be very rich, because many of us haven't had the opportunity to look at all the plans, so that's really fantastic. So do share.
Maybe, because I have not particular views on the public-private partnership, apart from being an economist, of course. First of all, let me quickly introduce myself. So I'm an advisor in DG ECFIN, where I've worked for more than 31 years. I'm replacing Andrea Marate, who participated in earlier debates, but who cannot attend today. So as I said, I will just relay a few thoughts on the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which, as the word says, is focused on resilience. I would probably say more on the resilience is ultimately more important than recovery, because in some respects it will be kind of automatic. And what I also want to underline is that in the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is part of the wider initiatives taken following up on the crisis in the context of Next Generation EU, what we really aim at is not so much bouncing back, but I would call it bouncing forward. We want to bounce forward to a new future-proof economies. And that's why there is this big emphasis on the digital and the green dimensions. It's also important to note that the Recovery and Resilience Facility and notably the plans which member states have submitted, 23 out of 27 member states have submitted their plans, is fundamentally bottom-up. So member states submit their proposals and ideas, and that's very good because then there is also real ownership. And so they submit that what is best for their circumstances and ambitions.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, this is balanced by check at the union level to make sure that all the criteria are respected. And these criteria, as you may know, relate to, first of all, having a substantial green component, 37% of the financing, digital, 20%, but also respecting principles like do no significant harm. And on these basis, all these programs are currently being processed by a huge number of my colleagues who are scrutinizing, sifting through all these programs, and are preparing the follow-up decisions by the council, the so-called council implementing decisions. Now, just focusing on the digital part, what can we learn from these programs which have already been submitted? In terms of increasing connectivity, we note important ambitions in countries like notably Austria, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Spain, Luxembourg, Poland, Cyprus, and Sweden. Denmark, Portugal, and Slovakia envisage specific measures to increase the uptake of digital technologies in the private sector. And third topic, the digitalization of public administration features prominently in the programs of many countries, including in Belgium, Germany, Greece, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Poland, Cyprus, and Sweden. And I think this is also interesting because there was especially this link to e-government services and the trust dimension linked to that. So it is important that these services are becoming more widely available, and therefore I think investment in this is also very topical for today's discussion. And the fourth and broad category are linked to measures investment in research and innovation with respect to digital technologies to boost transitions, and this is notably the case in Denmark, France, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Sweden. A final category is the skills, digital skills in populations like Spain, Ireland, and Italy. Now, if you want, but probably little time, I can expand on a few more typical examples, like in Belgium, Denmark, and Ireland.
Okay.
But
briefly.
These are all out in the programs, which can be, however, be very lengthy. I looked myself at the Belgian program; it's more than 700 pages long. So, but then you get.
But so it should be. There's a lot of money, public money involved. So we'd hope there's a lot of detail there. But no, carry on. Give us a taste of what what you've referred to in these 2 or 3 countries. What's distinguishing their approach from the past?
Well, from the past, I think, for example, we all, or part of us, live in Belgium, and sometimes we have had our own experience with the Belgian government. So
Indeed.
Here we will be sensing the biggest difference. So what I understand, for example, from Belgium, they intend to improve the connectivity of the national territory by continuing development of very high-speed fiber optic networks, but also by developing 5G corridors, which facilitate universal and affordable access to connectivity in all urban and rural areas. So high-speed internet basically everywhere, which is certainly not the case now. And they're also foreseeing an important investment in the digitalization of public administration, including the justice system. And in doing so, they're also paying particular attention to artificial intelligence and making sure that these technologies have a positive social impact. Belgium, just let me check, they reserving 187 million euros for this, out of which 100 million euros from the Recovery and Resilience Fund. Denmark, they aim to promote especially digitalization across the public and private sectors with a special focus for small and medium-sized enterprises. To strengthen welfare, equality, growth, employment, and green transition.
Mm-hmm.
And in this way, they want to improve digital readiness of the public administration again, to enhance citizens and business cybersecurity. I think cybersecurity was also mentioned in the report which you produced and which I read. They're focusing on modernizing digital infrastructure and ensuring digital inclusion by closing the digital divide. Maybe final example, Ireland, and then I stop. Ireland put forward 2 projects aimed at ensuring that all learners are equipped with appropriate skills for the digital age. One project is to ensure high-speed broadband connectivity for primary schools. The other project would provide funding for interventions to address the digital divide, again, particularly to access digital devices and relevant ICT infrastructures. And these projects are flanked by reforms to support digital transformation of Irish education at all levels in the schools, but also tertiary education and lifelong learning. And the objectives there are to mainstream essential digital skills across all settings, to address the risk of the digital divide, and to ensure sufficient supply of learners graduating with high-level ICT skills. So I think these are just a few examples which link to a number of the elements, at least which I read in the report. So these are the intentions right now, and of course these will have then to be set in motion. Belgium already presented its broadband action plan on the same day as it planned, so action is really set in motion. Sometimes it's not only the investment, but also changing laws on telecommunications, etc., which are important in this respect. So what will happen now is that following the approval of these programs, first by the Commission, but then ultimately by the Council of Ministers, member states can ask for funds, a certain, I think 13% they get as pre-financing, and then there will be regular follow-up according to the milestones and targets which have been negotiated with the Commission. And so any disbursements of money will be made dependent on meeting those agreed milestones and targets.
So Joost, that's helpful. And I know it's really hard for you to be able to zoom out and give us an assessment overall of all member states. But in terms of, there's 2 points. Give us very, very briefly the timescales for the next stages. So you said, they're being assessed right now. So, just to give us up to the end of the year, what are the key milestones in terms of decision making and release of money?
First of all, the programs were bound to be submitted by the 30th of April.
That's right, yeah.
Deadline, but so most member states did. A few are missing, including the country I know best, but they are waiting to new government. Once these programs have officially been submitted, and in a way there have been already many contacts between the Commission and member states before they officially submit, in order to make sure that it's
sure.
there are no surprises on either side. Then within that period, within 2 months, the Council has to agree the plan. And for this, they are taking what we are calling Council implementing decisions. And I guess very shortly, many of these programs will be discussed by the Council in several batches, because there are, as I said, there are already 23 plans. So once this is done, then there are financing agreements made between the Commission and the member states, and then money can be disbursed. As I said, there is this pre-financing. Out of the top of my head, it's 15%. So that will be coming in the autumn then.
Okay.
And actually, the Commission has already gone to the markets to borrow the first amounts of money to be able to make this available to the member states. So expect basically from the autumn to really the action to start. But as I said, some member states have already anticipated actions, and some actions have already been taken. and reforms are being prepared as we speak.
Joost, thank you very much. And finally, are you guys going to be pulling together some form of a dashboard of like where member states are in relation to their plans and the areas of focus and priorities, so that there's an element where any of us can have a view or be able to look into these plans? Is there any notion of that kind of transparency and a democratic accountability about these plans that for a Europe-wide view?
Well, first of all, we have a website. The Commission has a website on the Recovery and Resilience Plans where you will find links to all the published plans.
Sure.
We have linked through to the member states' ministries where you can find the plans. However, these are typically in the national language. So
precisely. Yeah.
French. In the case of Greece, it's Greek, etc.
Sure.
I do not know whether member states will be making available translations into English.
Okay, so just sorry, let me be more specific, because I've spent far too much, because I think we're all interested in what you're saying. But in a nutshell, is there going to be some form of European Commission assessment which you will make public about the plans in English?
Well, next to the Council implementing decisions, the Commission makes in-depth assessments of the plans. They do this through staff working documents. I'm pretty sure that these documents will also be made available on this website on the Recovery and Resilience Facility.
Okay.
So it will be an assessment per member state, one by one. It's not excluded. I'm not precisely aware of whether there are horizontal comparisons being done or published. What I've seen already is that another think tank, Bruegel, has already made some notes where they notably immediately draw horizontal comparisons. So in the very short term, that may be a resource worth looking at.
Okay. Yes. And this is not about think tank envy at all, but one would think, right, and this is not a criticism of you, Joost, at all. This is the largest use of public taxpayers' money. You'd have thought there'd be a bit more effort to provide an overview and assessment across the EU so that every bugger in the world can see where the money is being targeted and how it will be spent, and not left to an outside body to make that assessment. So perhaps something for us to come back to. You don't have to defend that. It's not, I'm not having a go at you, but it does make you irk somewhat that, you know, there is not only the size and the scale of civil service endeavour in overviewing both the financial and assessment of this internally within the Commission, you've had to put in new resources, but it is the largest use of public sector, public taxpayer money. You'd have thought the kind of transparency, democratic accountability would have been a priority to organise. And I'm not having a go. I'm just saying that ought to be a priority, surely, as we move ahead. But let's move on. Let's move on. And you can have a go back at me, but I wasn't having a go at you. It was the Commission. It was the institution more broadly on the chat. And those of you, if you disagree with me, say so on the chat too. I want to bring in Philippe. Philippe Maze-Sencier. Philippe, I'll let you introduce yourself, but I'm really pleased you're here, because I want to kind of get your take. You've been around the block. You know some of the matters that we're talking about. I'm really quite interested in your view on the supply chain elements of public-private partnerships and given what we encountered through the crisis. What's your view about how we move ahead, which is, I know, a big question, but over to you. First, do introduce yourself, and a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Philippe Maze-Sencier, I'm the chair of the Global Public Best Practice at Hill+Knowlton.
I think we have another, unless it's my earpiece, I can't hear you very well. You may need to speak up a bit more.
Can you hear me better now?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, let me just see if I can play with the volume. I hope this will make it better.
Great, that's much better, thank you.
Thank you. It's a broad question. I actually wanted to jump on two things that you sort of touched upon. I think one of our speakers talked about the absence of trust, and I think there was, in terms of also supply chain. So I'll get back to your point. I think this is absolutely critical. I'd like to use just two quick examples of things that have not worked well. And I'm sorry, as you said, I've been around the block. I will focus on the country I know best, though, which is not necessarily the most interesting, but the one I can talk about, France. In terms of the absence of trust in relationship, which really were problematic during COVID. One was simply hospital and clinic, so public and private. And during the first lockdown, when people were piling up in the hospitals, you saw very little partnership between public hospitals and clinics, and that was dramatic. Things could have worked much better. We saw people being evacuated on trains, on planes to Germany. I mean, this looks great on camera, but it is not what citizens want. And this happened while in clinics in Eastern France, nobody was, they were ready for COVID patients, but there was no public-private partnership. And there are plenty of reasons for this. This was really, mind-boggling. I'd like to focus also on what a young man of 24, app developer has done in helping just generate hundreds of thousands of people finding jobs and being able to book online, because what the state or the public bodies in charge had done did not work. And it's a 24-year-old who managed to change things. And I'm not saying he single-handedly changed the face of vaccination in France, but he definitely had a very big role in that. Again, private sector, young entrepreneurs. There was a question of trust also. People turned to him very quickly because it worked. And people left the public platforms because they didn't work. So nimble, faster, closer to people, that's something that the private sector can be bringing in certain cases. That means established relationships between private and public. It means working together more often, getting rid of misconception, preconception, but actually trying to work together regularly with very clear swim lanes. Who is best at what and doing what, and stick to it. It's also, and that's something which is difficult, but it's required because of changes of circumstances and just change in the way the world works. It's about flexibility in the way that public and private bodies work together. You may have signed for something, but you able to widen that berth and be able to switch on to something else, even if that was not necessarily the necessary original point of view. And you need to be able to do this quickly and nimbly. Finally, the last point I don't want to monopolize the floor too long. The last point, I think, I was very interested in this, in the report. Of course, this is all about Europe, but I think we need also to think about us, that we are living in a very competitive world, and whatever we are doing here needs to talk to our citizens, bridge some of the trust issues we have, but also prepare us to be competitive. And sometimes I worry that in Europe we are really good at regulating, but when you're talking about public-private partnership and supply chain resilience, but the way we go about things may be a hindrance actually rather than a help. And I will leave it at that.
So Philippe, are you saying that we're redlining too much with bureaucracy and therefore reducing our competitive edge through our desire to be greener, let's say, have a fairer system, to demand certain social clauses in terms of public-private partnerships?
My worry is that, well, the vision is great. We may be putting barriers that will actually end up leaving us behind. If we are too prescriptive, for instance, in terms of not being technology neutral in certain areas, we may actually find ourselves left behind because of competition. And I think it's difficult, but we need to find the right balance between achieving what we are aiming to do and being leaders in that, but also making sure that by if we are being too prescriptive, we may actually fall behind and either not benefit or not be able to lead the way that we are hoping to do.
And Philippe, finally, whilst I've got you, public-private partnerships are not new. They've been around for donkey's years, but mostly done in a way where there isn't a public common good element. It's more about infrastructure, being able to put something in place, and then there's a levy, and there's a tariff, and then actually citizens of taxpayers' money that's been used to subsidise the partnership, they end up paying more, let's say, for example, for tickets, for rail, or other such services. In your mind, now that, given what we've experienced in the past 18 months, right, and the kind of the notion of public sector, public-private partnerships come through all our work, and I'm really pleased to see my dear colleague Jamie Shea online, because we recently had a resilience sector. We had an exercise where we scenarioed a set of threats. And that theme of the absence of public-private partnerships was key in terms of how a city, a nation-state, a Europe would cope with a shock that we might encounter, without any notice. But in the context of public-private partnership, is your view that what needs to change in terms of government policy? Is this about government walking closer, or is it about the private sector saying we have ideas and we don't necessarily just always want a subsidy? This is an idea that actually could have a social good element to it. Do we need a different mindset or a dynamic or a very specific recommendation for government? Is this about government leadership, public sector leadership?
Dharmendra, I mean, you're absolutely spot on. This is $1 million question. I wish I had the answer.
Okay.
I'll just say one thing.
Yeah.
I think trust needs to be there. The private sector can do things often faster, more flexibly. Making a profit is not saying bad.
No.
You just need to make sure that it's done in a way which works for everyone, and that means having grown up in the room and being able to have a fair discussion. I think it is really what you said is a mix of governments being able to walk closer. But it's also truly a mindset. And I think that if I just look at what a 24-year-old was able to do and the impact he has had, that maybe sort of starts answering or provides a bit of an answer to your question.
Indeed. Thank you for bearing with me and my set of questions. But it does go back to the notion where we started with Joost, is that you've got these plans for spending hundreds and millions of euros. You'd have thought that in those plans you'd begin to see the hard wiring, the knitting of a different mindset and approach to public-private partnership. But I'm really pleased to welcome Bridget. Bridget, you've had your hand up for some time. You disagree with me. Tell me and share your disagreement. Please introduce yourself as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Bridget Cosgrave, and I am an independent advisor on public affairs here in Brussels, every European digital. I have to take exception to your viewpoint with respect to the resilience in reform, the RRFs, because I have been doing a great deal of research on this over the past month, and I believe that the member states have done a good job in terms of transparency on their plans, and most of them have translated them into English. And I can give the example of France, where I have reviewed several documents of their national plan. The lack of transparency is really at the national level. The Commission does a good job. The Commission puts out all the documents, gives all the very clear guidelines, and invites the member states to come forward with plans for grants, a huge amount of grant and loans. They've been creative in terms of looking on how they're going to finance this. They've been very quick to go to the market to raise the money. And so I would give the Commission full points on the conception and implementation of the program so far. What I have seen from my research is that the money is being allocated according to the key pillars, either 3, 6, or 9, however many a particular country wants to pick up on. But in fact, they go in and they're just additional funds going into national programs. And it's very challenging when you look at federated states, or you look at national governments with multiple layers, to actually follow up on these funds. And there, I don't see any difference from the situation we're in today to where we were in previous efforts to bridge the digital divide. Personally, I had deep experience in Poland, where Poland was sitting on 2 billion euros of EU structural funds to increase digital connectivity in rural and suburban Poland. And this money the government sat on for years, and much of it went unused. And,
Indeed.
this is the issue is the deployment capability in the local and regional areas in the member states, in my experience.
And Bridget, I don't disagree with you. All the points you're making, I have complete agreement in terms of actually this is the largest project the EU has ever managed. It's become almost the largest public bank to member states. It's pulled off a deal in record time. It's created a new conception of playing on the markets and creating new own resources. All of that, I give it to you, absolutely. But all that you set out in terms of member states and, the levels of government, it was ever thus. And my point is, shouldn't we change things given the fact that we are having the largest use of public sector money, public taxpayers' money? We've gone through a crisis that should have shaken us to the core about how we do business, as usual. And actually, my sense is of lack of patience to do things and accept things as they are. Poland's a case in point. Poland has done extremely well on European social funds, both in terms of its innovation and being able to get money that other member states have not been able to go. It's been the biggest net gainer of EU funds. But the point is, there isn't the accountability and transparency look back into the European Commission, and we need to have more of that. My point is, it's great you've done the work. I'm thinking of the citizen community out there that ought to have the hard work done by the European Commission to give us an overview, an assessment of what member states are doing. It's the only way you close that loop and create the accountability and improve trust. And if you don't do that, it'll be as it has always been. And we'll all be in this room and we all know how governments work. And we'll say, well, that's how it is. But hopefully the past 18 months has said to us that we stop using the term, that's how it is. And hopefully move forward and say, we can do better and much better in that regard.
To the member states. Challenge back to the member states.
Indeed.
At the member state level.
Indeed, absolutely. But therefore, we have to think about who does that. And I think there's a powerful role for the Parliament in this regard as well. It's also muscled up quite heavily. I need to move on to education, but I'm going to bring in Fabio. Fabio, I cannot resist but bring you in from Generali. Fabio, thank you for being with us, because I think given your place in the wider private sector ecology, I'd be really keen to hear your view in terms of what you've heard so far around public-private sector partnerships and this notion of being focused more on common public good. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Good to see you all. Good afternoon. So I'm Fabio Marchetti, head of government affairs for Generali. It's an insurance and asset management company administering 650 billion euros of assets. Now, regarding the partnership issue, it's one of the main themes that we put in front of us when we talk about resilience. We have seen that with the pandemic, there are more and more risks that are uninsurable, but that are coverable. And so we have, climate change risks, we have cyber risks, we have pandemic risks, as we were mentioning, that are uninsurable from a private sector perspective. And that's why we need to move towards a public-private partnership model. Mm-hmm. We've seen during this pandemic, a lot of SMEs having to close down, trying to find funds to stay open. Yeah, some of them were asking the money to the insurers, but of course we exclude war and pandemic from our coverage policies. Governments were scrambling out to look for money. And I think that if we get prepared with an idea that more and more the risks are so huge in front of us, climate change, as I was saying, pandemics, cyber, that we need to work together in a sort of multi-layer protection system where the insurance industry, the private sector put, and we have the experience of how to create these kind of products and how to collect, I would say, the money and invest it in the most efficient way, but bring in member states and the EU ultimately that can collect money from capital markets by creating such models, as it's done already in many areas of the world where you have natural, catastrophe bonds and these kind of products that are public-private partnerships amongst the insurance industry, countries, World Bank, other financial institutions. And so if we start working around such a model, we can really ensure the resilience of our societies. But we need to overcome this dichotomy where there's trust, no trust. I just trust the public and I don't trust the private, or vice versa. Really to work together, each one of us in the different areas have some sort of expertise that we can put on the table, but the challenges before us are so huge that alone public sector and alone the private sector can't solve them. And we have to absolutely work in partnership if we talk about resilience. The second aspect about resilience for us is about sustainability. Okay, we're coming out of a serious pandemic. Okay, if the money is used for sustainable transformation of our economies, that's how we're going to ensure the resilience of our society. We're working very much on this with small and medium-sized enterprises. We set up actually a program called SME Enterprise, which is a way to reward the most sustainable SMEs and help them in their journey towards more sustainable practices at a time where, for many of them, survival is the key imperative. And some of them are saying, but who cares about sustainability? I need to survive. We're there to help them. We want to, I would say, reward these sustainability heroes, we call them. And so we're doing this at member state level, and then we're going to do a big event in Brussels on the 29th of September. And it's going to be a yearly initiative where, we try to bring small and medium-sized enterprises that distinguish themselves for their efforts in the field of sustainability to say, this is the future, this is the direction in which we need to go. Resilience is also about long-term sustainability. And as long-term investors, we invest for 20, 30, 40 years down the line. We know that we don't want to invest in stranded assets, and we know that the economy is going in a certain direction, and that's where the money needs to be channeled. So these are the two key points for an insurer and asset management that need to be taken into consideration.
Fabio, thank you. That's really very, very helpful in terms of very specific examples or, practical things that we should be thinking about. And how do we, I suppose, use your experience, and you are a large player in the marketplace, to find ways in which that could be replicated elsewhere. I'm very interested, this is not for now, but perhaps something that, where those of you who are interested in this is this notion of an asset class or a bond or a financial instrument that is a mix of public-private sector money that helps us in times of shock. So you start feeding into it. So you create some absorption capacity as a financial instrument looking forward, which might actually think differently about what these instruments and bonds are about. It would be fascinating to have your views on that, Fabio. Even if that's something that's just so pie in the sky that no one will do, it's like making sure you're saving for the future, for a future shock, but you're doing it in a way that's money wise and money smart. If you like. But let's see what people have to say. But I would welcome your thoughts on that as we develop this conversation. I must move on to education. Thank you. This has been absolutely fascinating in that we've tried to look at what the kind of issues might be in public-private partnerships and what the challenges are. A lot of it's not new. But some of it's actually about us having a different mindset for change in a good way. Related to these partnerships is education and skills. What we witnessed was actually our systems weren't fit in the crisis. Kids and young people missed out on education. We didn't have the infrastructure in place in time. We didn't have the kind of public-private sector partnerships to enable both the continuity of learning in our homes and elsewhere, but also in terms of skills acquisition. And those of you who've been around the block or around in this game for a long time will know industry has always complained in whichever country you're in, industry has always complained that actually the state does not turn out enough young people with the right skills to be employed. We have that dynamic across decades. We need to change that, surely. So first I want to kind of move to a conversation around the kind of improvements we need to seek to happen in terms of what we're doing around education skills for more balanced lives. And I'm really pleased that we have Stephanie Trpkov, are you there? From the World Bank. You're muted, Stephanie. You need to unmute you.
Hello. I hope you can hear me now.
We can, Stephanie. Thank you for joining us, Stephanie. Just briefly introduce yourself, but obviously I said you're from the World Bank, but say a little bit about what you do, so just for, for everyone else's benefit, and give us your view on this particular topic.
Hello, I'm a competitiveness consultant at the World Bank here in Croatia, and I also manage a tech consultancy firm as well. So on the topic of education, I'm going to actually focus more on the private sector aspect and the economics of it, rather than the school and the young childhood learning aspect of education. So one aspect, I read the materials and all that, it does a very good job of pointing out the what needs to change, what needs to be done. However, the reality in Southeastern Europe is that the investment in these skill acquisition on workers at every level is usually transferred to employers, and they see it and resist that additional cost burden, and then they transfer it to the individual. So whoever wants to advance or have other capacities, they need to develop it themselves or ask for it themselves and inevitably finance it themselves. So my point today will be focused on these. We've heard a lot of these talking about the high-level plans on accountability and skill, and the moderator himself mentioned the size of these projects. On one hand, I'd like to point out that the capacities of the public sector officials are usually not up to par with the private sector. And so there is the education aspect, that's the capacity building aspect for the public sector actors, from the national to the subnational levels. While on the other hand, you have this desire for programs, new programs from the private sector that are within the market that no one is interested in investing in. So we then have this complete disbalance across the board, both in terms of fragmentation from national to subnational levels, within the public sector departments, various units and departments, as well as the private sector pursuing the market opportunities and facing the effects of these disruptions and not really having the support that they need. So I would just point to 3 very concrete objectives for these reskilling efforts that should be done within the Recovery and Resilience Facility. And that would be, one, that the cities and local communities should be prepared for transformation with practical guides and examples and clear reskilling strategy, whether it's digital, whether it's project management. It doesn't all have to be ICT. It could be in communication as well. So very clear practical guides should be standard for it across the board. Second would be to support the implementation and create impact on the ground, such as advisors, data analysts, operational support, technical assistance for whomever needs it, so that these programs could be pursued to the logical end. And then third and finally, I would suggest to mobilize the communities, whatever communities there are. If it's the local tech communities, integrate them with others, like the agricultural communities. So mobilize the local ecosystem, break down the silos, and then grow this network of excellence that would be both trans-regional and transnational. And then we can talk on a European EU level on bridging these skills gaps. I'll stop for now.
It's definitely great. Really clear, specific. Can I just ask a challenging question? Have you seen this happen anywhere? Your 3-point grand plan? No, actually, it's great. It's good. Have you seen it?
Yes, I have, because I'm currently working as the lead expert on the 100 Intelligent Cities Challenge.
Great. Okay.
Cities it's an EU program, and we're helping cities pursue their Pact for Skills initiative. And so part of this skills building and reskilling is imbued into the Intelligent Cities, which is about digital transformation and digitalization.
Stephanie, can you share resources about that and, you know, with everybody? If you've got a link to some of your work, I think people will find that really helpful. But, you know, the one thing that I think is fascinating what you say, and, you know, we've alerted to that some time at Friends of Europe, is about looking at not only and this is not an ageist comment, there's a demography of those who work in public institutions, but there's also the skill set and the competence. And this is not to denigrate that in any way, but sometimes we need to think differently about the skills we need in this century for managing the uncertainty, the challenges and unpredictability. But what we do about this false distinction sometimes about the use of, making public good happen without thinking too hard about the public-private financing of it. And I don't mean that about lack of transparency or accountability, but we need to be able to think about money and capital very differently as we move ahead potentially. And there's something about the agility that we require within public institutions, which hasn't come up in these debates up to this point, but we know, Friends of Europe, we've raised this point in various of our other publications, that how do you get the, this is not just, it's always easy to say the public sector has all this agility and ways of working and competence because it's about money. I don't actually agree with that. I think there's something about that competence that we should be expecting within the public sector. And your comments are really well noted. Giampaolo, let's take a very different perspective potentially. Giampaolo, you've been a regular passenger and activist in this journey on Connected Europe. It's good to have you back. You represent a very large Italian foundation. Give us your perspective on the issue of education skills briefly. You're mute. Yes, great.
You hear me?
Yes, I can now. Welcome.
Thank you. Now, a few considerations starting from our experience, but also from what it is raised from previous conversations with the Friends of Europe. Digitalization and the new technologies are imposing a profound transformation, especially after the pandemic. Regarding rethinking education and training in the digital age, we think that digital skills and new models for learning need to be developed with an integral, multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder approach. This is the key element.
Yeah.
But we must seek out broader horizon of thought, adopting specific digital tools while focusing on a path of accompaniment. Accompaniment is essential, especially of vulnerable people, because this is the point. From point of view of our experience from NGO. Keeping in mind the importance of digital and technical skills, but also of psychosocial support as well, of soft skills. When implementing projects can help communities to be more effective and resilient. This is the point. Relationship is the starting point, and the CSOs, the civil society organization, have the capacity to respond to the needs of communities, and also they have to improve this capacity, but at the same time, the government, the public institution, they have to help the civil society organization to improve their capacity with the technical system, but also in order to modify the environment, the regulation environment. So, through the next generation way, the recovery funds, we have to recognize the added value of a potential new co-design logic between different partners and organizations, public and private. And that was what was mentioned before, no? But it's necessarily a new logic, a new way to work together, not with a bottom-up approach, no? To work together, co-design. And according to me, if we wanted to have success in this, we have to keep in mind we have to answer three questions. How we can create a permanent mechanism to strengthen the partnership between public and private organizations, institutions, to promote and to co-design initiatives for communities. Second, how can we keep challenges like digital skills, learning, employment opportunities integrated in a long-term work of accompaniment and mentoring of the people? These are two questions that I also hope that some participants can try to respond, because are essential if we want to maintain this capacity to maintain on board the vulnerable people, because this is, according to our perspective, is very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think this, you know, goes back to the colour of money. We know that there's public money with a very particular sense of purpose, one would hope, the private sector money, and you've got philanthropic money in this, and you've also got money that's being raised by the public for goods, for good causes. But I suppose there's something about how do you think of a model, and you talk about co-design, which also necessitates an element of power sharing, which institutions aren't very good at right at the beginning. And one would think that, you know, from what you've just said and what we've heard, isn't the time right now for, let's say, private sector partners to actually come forward with, let's say, European Commission or national member states and say, let's rethink education and let's make it fit for purpose of the 21st century. Let's pull together, we don't have to call it a commission, whatever. It's just like, let's get a plan together to make ourselves shock absorbent, but think through fundamentally the purpose, content, utility, and the skills development for the future, which is based on a public, you know, public sector providers and government coming together. Perhaps that's happening. Perhaps I don't know. Perhaps you know. If you do know, and if you do know, share. And if you think it's a good idea, say so too. And let's see if some of us can make some of you can make that sort of idea happen. But on that note, Cristina. A really warm welcome to you, Cristina Pozzi, one of our European young leaders. Good to welcome you.
Well, thank you, and hello everyone, and thanks for having me today in this very interesting conversation.
Just briefly introduce yourself, Cristina.
Different difficult points. There are many questions on the plate.
Yes. Just briefly introduce yourself, Cristina, just for the benefit of our team on Zoom.
Of course, I'm the COO and head of content of Treccani Futura. This is a new company that was born a few months ago. Actually, Treccani is the Italian encyclopedia institution. And so we created this new company that is willing to become an hub for head tech and innovation in education. So we're trying to move from knowledge also to skills and education in the world of an encyclopedia, of course. So we're sitting on a lot of knowledge here, and what we are actually willing to do is to create an inclusive environment. And this is a point that is very important for me, and that will be part of my observations here. Because of course, what we're trying to do is to think about everyone. So right now we're talking about people who are looking for a job, for example, and companies looking for skills they don't find on the market. We're talking about schools, but actually, if we want to really talk about the education we need today, we need to think about people of all ages. We said in the beginning that we need a lifelong learning approach. And I think also that the challenges we're facing today, also because of the pandemic, but mainly because of this new digital age we weren't prepared for, are challenges that are really much deeper, because it becomes a question of citizenship. If we don't have the skills to understand our world, we don't have the language that we need to understand the digital world, data, to select the news sources, understand what we're reading about, online and use everything that we have right now as new tools coming from the digital revolution, actually we are not going to be able to fully be citizens of our country. So actually the real challenge here is how to create an ecosystem that can also respond to these questions, not only how to create new skills in the youth or create new skills for the companies who are looking for jobs. I think actually, and I very much agree with Giampaolo when he's talking about we need to create it, to co-design it bottom up, and to have communities to be part of it. And I really think that schools actually have the opportunity here to become the center of this kind of revolution. So of course we need collaboration from the private sector and the public sector, but we really need to think how to enable specific communities to create the environment that works best for them locally and also with a global view. And so it's really about enabling the local communities, meaning the private companies who are in that community, meaning the families, meaning the adults who are willing also to get educated about digitalization or to create conversations with the other generations. So actually, what I see here is the opportunity, because we have been shaped by the pandemic. We have the funds, and we really understand that we need a more resilient approach. So this is the opportunity to really
so Cristina, yeah, but so sorry to cut across. So Cristina, so you've got, just to be clear, so are you going to be responding to people coming up with ideas for education, or are you going to be intervening and an actor in helping design education for the future?
Well, actually, we are building digital platforms that are willing to enable an ecosystem to work better, of course, for the Italian market at first. So we are actually also mapping whatever else there is around here in Italy, and that can be of help in order to innovate in education for schools, but also for company and for adult education. And we're willing to do it also creating ourselves new solutions. So actually we are having a hybrid approach here. So something we are going to create ourselves and something else we are willing to include from others. If there is something that works, we can do it better together. So that's
and
the approach we are having.
Just very briefly, before I move on to the issue of trust, and this is linked to that, do you know of many people that were consulted in the Italian plan for recovery and resilience? So was there a sense of, was there a level of consultation with key players in Italy, let's say from the private sector or the civil society sector, on the plan submitted by, you know, the great man that used to be at the bank and now is, you know, in charge of Italy?
I would say not really, but I have to say that somehow on part of it, I feel like I've been, let's say, somehow consulted, because I was part of a committee of that last year worked on the future of education from the previous ministry. And that committee was guided by the current Minister of Education. And what we have been working on has been included in the new plans. So somehow I've been consulted with a bunch of people, but actually I think that the time frame was so short that we didn't really have the chance to include many people.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you for your contribution. I want to, really welcome that. And also it's a sign of, I suppose, people like yourself and others will have a different sense of confidence in the man and are prepared to give a bit more slack, because you might see the system improving in many ways, especially in terms of governance. Okay, so governance and trust are key, but I want to kind of move into trust and citizen engagement. And I'm really pleased that we have someone from Commissioner Šutić's cabinet here. So I'm going to pick on you, Toma, if I may, to give your take. And I know where you sit, so I know that you can't speak your mind, if I could put it that way. But I'd love to hear from you in terms of how, where do you think we are on the policy? Because Dubrovska has quite a full remit in terms of citizen engagement, etc., Conference of the Future of Europe, la 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 la. What's your sense of it now in terms of where it's at and what you've been hearing now about, the issue of education resilience, the issue of public-private partnerships? Where's your sense of trust and citizen engagement? Where are you going with it?
Hello, and hi to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Toma Šutić. I'm a member of the cabinet of Vice President Šuica, who is charged with a very difficult portfolio, or very comprehensive portfolio, as you say, dealing with democracy and demography. So this discussion today has been really very interesting for me to follow, and many of the topics really resonate with the things that we are trying to do. So very happy to be here with you today. A couple of things that I would like to say, also going back to the paper that you have shared with us. I think when we talk about trust, and in the paper here we have focused on achieving our sustainability targets without trust, and not being able to achieve the sustainability targets without trust. Actually, I don't think we can achieve any of our targets if we don't have a trust between the different stakeholders. And this is a humongous task for all of us to continue to build this trust and to engage with each other in a very open and transparent way, and see how we can learn from each other. And in a way, that is actually what the Commission has tried to do with the Conference on the Future of Europe. We have actually envisioned this conference before the crisis, before the pandemic, before the big trust or before the crisis of trust, if you wish, that has also affected our democracies. And we've designed it as a very open exercise, as one in which any citizen can come in and bring a topic that is of their interest, and present it in this multi-language digital platform to the world to see, and for others to participate in the discussion with them. So this level of trust in institutions, but also trust in citizens, in a way, has been something that is kind of a red thread that is going through this Conference on the Future of Europe exercise that we are really now in the middle of, because we have on the one hand the citizens who are willing to express themselves more and more. We are seeing that our representative democracy needs to be strengthened. It needs to be helped. And then, these elements of participatory democracy, such as Conference on the Future of Europe, is one of those things that we really believe should come out and help all of us build this level of exchange, both, as I say, the citizens, but also the decision makers. And we are seeing that in the interesting discussions between the three leading institutions on the Conference on the Future of Europe. As we go through the exercise, and as we gather all of the various inputs from the citizens and the civil society, of course, there's also going to be a certain level of disaccord between the different stakeholders, and we will need to ensure that everybody really has their say.
Yeah.
But we also need to ensure that we build in a really high quality and functioning feedback mechanism, through which,
absolutely,
first of all, we're asking people to bring to organize events on the platform, report on them on the platform, but really report on them on the platform in a way that can be useful, that can be taken forward in the various other discussions on as part of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And then we, as the institutions, have also taken on board and made a promise to follow up on the conclusions. to really not only listen to what we have heard from the citizens, but also act on that. So I think that is something that will be the test of the success of all of these.
Sure. Toma, yeah, sorry to cut across you because I'm running out of time. What would be, this is not for you to answer necessarily straight away, but it will be helpful to us that in terms of, we've submitted something to you, as we have to all others, in terms of, it could just be words and it's meaningless and it means nothing to your policy development and your thinking. What would be good to know is, what would be helpful to you from the workings of these minds that have been working over this past year? What would be useful in the brief that you have on the Conference of Future Europe? One of the things that what we have said in there is that why invest so much on citizen digital platforms and just end them at next spring? Why not continue them as a facet of citizen engagement for the European Commission in the future? What role, for example, are you playing or others playing to make sure that the resilience and recovery plans funding have an element of democratic renewal or democratic mindset in terms of accountability built within them? What kind of read across is there between what you're doing and what's happening in terms of the new Bauhaus initiative, which is trying to bring in this bottom-up approach about making making Europe beautiful and think differently about Europe? So it would be helpful to know from you, Toma, at some stage, what would be helpful in terms of are the recommendations that we're set out in the report useful to you? If not, what kind of information, what kind of approach do you need from the outside in to help you do your business better, if you like?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's actually exactly what you have said. So we need from you, from the society, to tell us what has been working so far in the way that the Commission has interacted with the citizens, and what hasn't, and what would you like us to keep in the future. There were very clear, articulated reasons on why we should continue to keep the platform would be very welcome. On reasons on how we can continue to have citizens' assemblies that don't end in 2022.
Indeed.
Would be really welcome. So we are fully open to receiving this type of feedback because we really want to understand from the citizens, also through this, what are the best ways to engage with them. We have certain elements now. We have citizens' dialogues. We have
Indeed.
Initiatives, but we understand that our democracy is developing, it's growing, it's changing all continuously, and we welcome these type of very clear messages. What would be helpful also is that if it didn't come only from one stakeholder, but if it came from a number of them. So
sure, I agree with you.
That's the core.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful to know. But you'd think, you're an advisor, and there are many there who've seen the trajectory of voting for the in the European elections. We saw the biggest hit, i.e., in terms of success, at the last ones. In less than 2 years, we've got more, and we've just gone through the biggest shock in our systems. You'd think, right, that having these processes of continued engagement with government through the national assemblies or digital platforms would be a good thing. But that, from our point, from Friends of Europe in particular, but also some of the players here, the continuity of online platforms beyond the spring would make absolute common sense and actually have strategic value as you move ahead. And the other thing that, which is difficult for a large administration, I know, especially a huge unwieldy bureaucracy, is policy coherence. And I think that's one of those key things that we need to keep a mind on, is that, you go one way on the Bauhaus, another way on the Conference of Future Europe, and then you've got national plans being consulted on money. And somehow there's a need to, I know it's not always easy, because you've got politics and political ambition woven into all of that. But thank you very much for your comment. I'm going to move on to Monica. You've been really patient. Monica, it's really good to welcome you.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
It's lovely to see you. Briefly introduce yourself again for the benefit of our virtual room here, and then say what your thoughts are on trust and citizen engagement very briefly.
Sure. So my name is Monica Sanders. I'm a professor at Georgetown University, and I actually teach hazard economics, but I think a lot about crisis management and resilience. So I'm very happy to be here with you all. As I'm listening across the different themes that you've talked about, particularly on this last issue of trust, what I read in the report and some of the things that we've been talking about is this issue of silo breaking, but the need for government to make this balance between both being agile and being granular when it comes to understanding what's happening at the local and community level. And I will give you an example coming out of the pandemic is that, acknowledging that we're emerging from a period of political instability, I think has been very pronounced and transparent here in the United States, but I don't think that we're alone in struggling against this. But getting a sense of what people are thinking and who's actually suffered and what they need in order to be able to return to the state that we want them to be in. And some of the work that we did was we looked specifically at different groups of women along our eastern seaboard. We wanted racial and ethnic minorities. And we noticed they had twice the rates of mental health issues that was cascaded against divestment from the digital platforms that they would need to do the kinds of citizen engagement that we're talking about. And then over the course of the year, their economic mobility went down by 10% vis-a-vis the national levels. And I don't think that that's something that's isolated to this one particular region of the United States. So what that signals to us is that there is an imperative for governments to understand actually what's happening in communities and take those experiences as our signal to how we need to write policy. So I appreciate what you talked about, co-decision level and peer-to-peer engagement, because that's where the ground truth of what policy needs to look like. And then we need to be agile and flexible enough to say, the way that we've been writing it the past several generations will not be effective in a post-COVID-19 global society. And so what we need to do is to do more continuous, distinct, but also sustainable policy writing so that we match up with what's happening at the local level and understand that that aggregates at a national, at an EU, and then at a global, multi-sectoral, multilateral level is where I think we need to be thinking. And I appreciate much of what was in the report. But as usual, you come to me for summaries, and that's what I've seen as a need for both granularity and agility at the same time. Another big challenge.
No, absolutely. Monica, as ever, I love your clarity. What would be good is to share some of the resources that the information you just talked about, because I think that what you've described in terms of the economic impact and looking at the relationship with technology, as you say, it's not distinct to just the Eastern Seaboard or that part of the United States. That's, I think, a reality across the globe, and more so where you don't have the infrastructure. And it'd be good to share that learning that you've had so that we are able to think about it too in terms of what that means. Thank you very much, Monica. I'm going to move on to Dorthe. Dorthe Nyemann.
Hello there.
Hi, please do introduce yourself very briefly and give us your, because you're from the Royal Danish Defence College, is that right?
Yes, I am, and I think that reflects what I had in mind looking at the paper for today, because I come from working with hybrid threats and deterrence. So when I look at this issue, what I come to think about is the question on resilience and feeling safe and secure. The connection, if citizens feel safe and secure, then resilience is working in the right direction. And what was my take on it is, how do we provide that in the digital sector? For me, I think we have to work on, in Europe, mirroring how the state works in the physical world. I know this is a different solution from what you think about in the US. But my take on it in building resilience would be to focus on the citizen level of feeling secure on the internet. And this would take a focus on data protection, much more on privacy, but also on rights on the internet and equality in the digital space. You can see that the Commission is working very much on these issues, and I think this will be the right way to go. And I think that the more progress we will have on this field, the more people will feel a sense of security online and safety. And this will generate the trust that is needed in a resilient society, a digital resilient society.
So Dorthe, you're saying that actually, yeah, go on. Sorry, let you finish. I'm interrupting you. I do apologize. Go on.
Sorry, just pose your question. I know time is soon up. So,
what you're saying ultimately then is that work from where people are at in terms of their online world, and actually, if we start with their sense of safety in it, that other things will generate as a result. But in specific terms, if you were to say this is the one thing you should do, is there a specific thing, or is it because you're saying that, you know, we know there's a digital wallet proposal out, we know that members of parliament here in Europe have said AI should not be used for any form of facial recognition, etc., and so forth. Are these the kind of things you're talking about that shine, are putting us in the right direction about what you're talking about?
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. And I think that data protection is really key, giving data control over your own data back to the public. And there are places in Europe that we can go to for inspiration. I would point to Estonia for one case where they have come very far in sort of giving citizens sovereignty over their own data to a large extent. I think in that respect, Europe and the EU could really show strength and live up to the values that they have proclaimed that they have.
Sure.
So the connection, resilience, safety, security, that's sort of the angle that I get from looking at these papers. How do we work towards that?
Indeed, Dorthe. And there's a kind of interesting mood music taking place, isn't there, in the Parliament, in the sense of the, you know, the proposals for a wallet, but the proposals around algorithm accountability, and, you know, this notion of making sure that there is no use of AI in any form of, you know, facial recognition or, you know, recognizing people in terms of it becoming much more high risk, and there will be no such thing as public safety or public trust. So there is an interesting mood music here. I'm desperately running out of time. I'm going to crave an extra few moments of your time if I can, for those who are able to. But before I wrap up with Lindsay, our senior fellow, and Ben, back to you. But Rosalind, you know, you're from the UN. You're working in the Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. It'd be really interesting to get your take on this, because we've moved from like an element of discussion about trust into this wider systemic issue of what systems do to enhance trust as we move forward. Over to you.
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me, and I'll be really quick because I know you're running out of time, but just to say this has been a great conversation. I come from the world of disaster risk reduction, and I really like the way that you've pulled in a much broader community looking at a whole range of risks. Very quickly, I think, you know, the pandemic has called a lot on citizens to take action, to make sacrifices, and you know, we've done it. So, but now it's so important to keep that trust, and building back better, resilient and green will be crucial. You know, we need to prove that we've done that. And I don't think at the moment we've got all the metrics to kind of show that we are becoming more resilient. You know, we've got pieces across different organizations in the UN, the EU, but I do like the idea that you've brought up of a dashboard that could start to piece together this broad resilience approach, and so that we can prove to citizens, you know, how we're now investing in, you know, like disaster resilience, broader resilience prevention, and the difference that it's making to everyone's lives. I think, you know, we've all come in from different sort of risk perspective, and I think that calls for a multi-hazard approach, whether it's, you know, cyber risk, digital risks, or digital approach, climate, environment. So I think that would be great to bring out in the paper, the multi-hazard approach. I think that's really important also in building the trust that we build back, not just to one risk, pandemic, but, you know, we're ready for all the kind of risks that we face in the future. I think we need to communicate better on the risks that we face, that citizens face, and again, you know, how we're investing in prevention to save lives. So, you know, I would conclude by, again, appreciating this kind of the way that you brought together all the different actors around this resilience topic, and, you know, this first point that you raised at the beginning on, you know, how do we make sure that this chat on resilience doesn't sort of go into nowhere. delivers something concrete. And I do wonder, and as I read your working paper, whether, you know, we need a kind of think resilience principle that could be brought into policy making to bring some of these elements together. Yeah, I could say much more, but I'll stop there because I know time is short. But thanks.
Rosalind, thank you. Just as you were kind of cooking up there in terms of, that wasn't a pun on your name. I do apologise. I meant in terms of the fact that, you know, this notion of the policy principle, you know, the resilience policy principle. I think that can be a useful device because, you know, those of you who've worked in government know that you need the gear stick and you need the dashboard of your let's say in terms of fuel consumption and your speed, and you need these devices almost in public authorities to be able to drive them in a certain way, and you need to find those levers that'll help the public administrations be more nimble, more effective, shock absorbent, and, you know, as we said, that kind of sense of multiple risk assessment, which is cross-sectoral and cross-society, is the only way in terms of us moving forward and making much more use of foresight, but data. You know, we really need to be able to pull together, as you say quite rightly, Rosalind, the data that's been created in the past 18 months. And what does that teach us? What do we learn from that? But how do we use foresight more? Thank you all. I've run out of time desperately. I'm 3 minutes over, but if I may, crave your indulgence a bit more to just have a few words and reflections from my dear senior fellow colleague, Lindsay Nefesh-Clarke, and then I'll give final words to Ben. Lindsay, welcome.
So hello, thank you for having me today. My name's Lindsay Nefesh-Clarke. I'm the founder of a social enterprise called W4, and we work to promote girls and women's digital inclusion, equality and leadership. And we work very closely with Equals. It's a global partnership for gender equality in the digital age. And I also have the immense privilege of being a European young leader. So thank you everybody for just an excellent discussion. We've had 3 excellent discussions, and today again, more insights, compelling ideas. I would like to say, especially given where I'm coming from and the kind of work that I do, Ben, you said at the outset of this conversation, resilience, well, digital is at the heart of that, and I think we would all agree. But a theme that's been prominent in today's conversation is of course, trust. And, Ben, you said, okay, well, we're seeing this correlation between, say, digital inclusion and empowerment and increased trust. I tend to think that that's not going to suffice. And in reading the paper and listening to everybody today and just where my own thinking is at, I really do think that we need to foster this trust, and that this trust, as a previous speaker said, if we want to achieve these ambitious objectives in, say, the digital decade and the digital compass, we're going to need trust to achieve that. I would say that I see that possibly a solution lying in digital citizenship. I think it was Dorthe, the previous speaker. I totally agree with you that we need to be thinking in terms of reassuring people. And we see in the framework, I think when it comes to the European Commission, in the digital decade, the digital compass framework, it talks about digital rights, digital principles. And what I would love to see is, well, okay, that could be so enabling for all stakeholders to have this framework that we all have in common. But I think there should be a lot of education when it comes, and lifelong education about what does that mean, digital citizenship. Because it can be empowering, of course, across a multitude of dimensions. And maybe just touching on the public-private partnerships, well, I think these subjects are so gargantuan. We know now that we're not going to, it's not the public sector or the private sector that's going to achieve the solutions to these challenges alone. But also we have extensive evidence that we're more effective through collaboration, through private-public partnerships. I'm really looking forward to distilling the ideas in these the previous discussions, today's discussion. I guess what I would say is that when during these conversations, I've been trying to do a little bit of homework, look at what's happening here and there, look at what's going on at the level of the European Commission. And I think that if at the end of this, if we as a collective, through our reflections and our recommendations, if we can bring pressure to bear on the various stakeholders, whether it's at the European Commission level, at the national level, whether it's the regional and local level, whether it's, you know, our own level, to see these targets become actions, and to see the accountability, where I stand right with you, Dharmendra. We need the accountability. I'd push for the dashboard, and that would already be a major achievement. And then maybe one teeny point is, as you probably know, it's the kickoff of the Generation Equality Forum. It started in Mexico. It's coming here to Paris. And the previous speaker, I think it was Toma, Šutić, when you talk about the citizen engagement platforms, I'd say we need to keep them. That is, and it could go further than consultation. It can go as far as commitments. I mean, that's where we can really mobilize collective action.
Lindsay, thank you so much for that enthusiasm, passion, but also thoughtfulness about how we do some of this and how to take this forward. Ben, final thoughts from you. As you know, you were right, ambitious agenda. We kind of went deep and shallow, but hopefully enough of a rhythm and movement to some of the words and music that we've you know, pulled together today, which has been extremely rich. But over to you for your kind of reflections.
Yeah, and a challenge to reflect on such a broad-ranging debate and discussion and conversation today. So let me actually ask you the same in terms of being right, Dharmendra. I mean, if I go back to where we started this program, months and months ago, we talked about Connected Europe being, you know, resilient, green, successful, the different components. I think what has transpired in the last 6 to 8 months has proven that those themes to be correct. So I think this has been a great program in predicting and then playing through with the themes that will matter for Europe going forward. And I think what has come out then in terms of some of the substance of the debate, and the word trust is never far away from the discussion we have, it is going to be important to bring forward into the policy recommendations how we ensure that trust is there, and how we ensure the voice of the citizen resonates strongly through what we say. And just my only reflection of today, I think we've thought about trust in terms of trusting in the digital process. But we as a company, we've recognised that we can't meet the digital decade targets alone. This public-private partnership is an essential part of what we need in terms of delivering these bold ambitions for Europe. From your own comments, Dharmendra, and from the comments on the chat about public-private partnerships, there needs to be that layer of trust in terms of where public money goes and how it's used, and how those public-private partnerships actually take effect. And maybe that's something we've underestimated as a company. We've been talking a lot about the role of the Recovery and Resilience Facility in driving Europe forward and kickstarting the digitalisation, which will then have a long way to go until we actually meet those targets. We need to have trust all the way through that process. From the announcement of the funding, from the funding projects themselves, and then to how we bring citizens along with us on what is going to be a complex journey of digitalisation, but one which we know will increase the resilience of Europe, but also increase its success and increase its greenness. So with that, thank you again for hosting another very interesting debate.
No, thank you. And, you know, colleagues, sorry, I run over. And, you know, in that classic terminology, all the good things have to come to an end, don't they? And this is, you know, it's been a fabulous journey. I hope that we can continue the discussions around Connected Europe next year, but in a different framework, if you like. But I think the clusters of resilient, successful, and green will continue, absolutely. But I, personally, thank you for being with us throughout, both as working group members and as attending these policy insights. It's been rich and enlightening, and I hope you've had some fun along the way too. But it's not over yet, because the show, the kind of the big trailblazing or the curtain raiser we have is on October the 14th, where we will bring forward the work of your efforts, your brains, and unveil them there in terms of a set of recommendations, principles, ways of working, but also underpinned by all the views of citizens that we've been able to consult through focus groups in that deliberative fashion. It's very different. It's not just consultation. These have been, deliberative discussions with citizens on each of these topics. But between now and then, there's a couple of things. We're going to wrap all of this up together and we're going to share it with you. We want you to be able to think about it, comment on it, improve it, please. Or tell us we're talking a lot of crap. And we need to think differently. We'd really welcome your fastidious engagement with us. It'll be excellent. And what we are going to do by the end of this week is we're going to overlay this entire ecology of an approach we've developed with a survey. We're going to try. We've tried to make it straightforward and simple as possible, but not to be meaningless. And so we're going to be sending it out at the end of this week to all of you. And we'd really welcome you socializing it within your network so that we're able to get as much of a response rate as possible. And this will feed into the final report. So between now and then, there'll be a survey. We will send you out a draft report also for your views in terms of what will come back in October as a final report, because we will genuinely take on board your views within the framework of this Connected Europe partnership. So thank you. I think the last words are, there was a little bit of hope that's been, as I said, the mood music from the Parliament about algorithm accountability, about AI not being used in facial recognition. But I thought, the Portuguese, good for them. 1st of June, I think it was. 1st of June, the Lisbon Declaration about, digital democracy with a purpose. And in that, they're aiming to redefine what we mean by that. But there's an interesting phrase, let's redefine the European way of doing business. So I leave you with that thought because I know that they're going to pass that on to subsequent presidencies, both into the Slovenian and the French, as a part of the tripart approach in the European Commission to presidency. And let's see what we can do to influence and shape the thinking, not only the conclusions of the Portuguese, but as we move into the Slovenian and the French presidencies as well, because the issue of digital is not going to go away. That's for sure. We know that. It's with us for now into the future. Thank you all very much for your time, energy and effort. It's been really appreciated. And as I said, we'll be in touch with you very shortly. Thank you all. Mind your distance, be safe and take care. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Bye-bye.